welcome to this fourth lesson in the Flask series for making beautiful websites with Flask and Python, and of course HTML, CSS and Bootstrap. Now in this lesson we're going to do 6 things. We're going to finish off the views that we began in the last lesson. We're going to make a new page called Add Comments, which will fit with the button. We're going to make another add success.html page, which is going to be the page that a user would go to if they successfully added a comment into the database. And we're going to come to the database in a minute. So after that, we are going to actually work with databases finally, and we're going to be using SQL. I'm going to talk a little bit about my decision to work with pure SQL rather than use what's called an ORM, like SQL Alchemy. But we'll come to that in a minute. I'm going to make a table, we're going to populate, which means fill that table with data, and we're going to make a query, which is going to set us up for the last lesson, well, the next lesson anyway, about databases, where the whole program comes together and we have a working website. So lots to cover, let's get started. So we're going to get back into building our Flask application. And of course what we were doing is we were looking at the views, I'm calling them views, I mean the HTML files, and let's get that all right so it's ready to go for connecting to a database. So if you remember, let's get back into our CMD, and hopefully this is becoming like second nature to you now. So we remember that I've actually shifted where my files are, so I'm just going to get back onto them. Let's see, I think they're on the E drive. Let me just test that. It's exactly the same folder, but I've just shifted them onto a different memory stick, which had a bit more space. So that's the folder that I would like to get into, which I think has my virtual environment. Let's find out. Yes, it does. So let's activate the virtual environment. If you remember, you type in env/scripts. And brilliant, we're in my virtual environment. Now we need to actually, you can see that I want to get into my Flask folder. My Flask folder is where the actual .py file is. So I'm going to go cd my Flask folder. And now I can run the server. So if I say dir, you can actually see that that's the big questions.py, that's the main Python file, which I call which allows us to actually run this Flask server. So I'm gonna do that. Python, what was it? Bigquestions.py, and it runs the server. And to recap, let's have a look. 127. We remember this is what our site was looking like, or what it should look like rather. So add a comment, you put something in, such as test. It says you've submitted your comment, thanks. And then you go back to home and you can see that the comment that you've just added has been actually added to the database. Now we've not done that yet. We've just about, in the last lesson, added a nav bar and we added this little button, but we hadn't done anything else. So for instance, when you click add comment, it looks like it just generates a form down here, but actually what it's doing is it's taking you to a separate HTML page which has a Bootstrap form at the bottom. So let's have a look at how that's done. So I've come back now into my original folder and my Flask project that I was working on, that was in the last lesson. So what I had just shown you was the updated version with the product of connecting to a database. But let's come back to the original thing that I was working on, and this is what it looked like. So we've got the navigation bar, haven't added a contact page yet, we had a home button, but when we click on this add a comment, it doesn't do anything. And this is just dummy data over here, which doesn't make any sense. So we have a couple of things that we need to do, so let's think about what they are. First of all, when I click add a comment, I would like that to actually generate it, to actually open up a new page, which is going to have a form, a Bootstrap form, with the following fields on it. It's going to have title, name, and comment. So someone can put in a title, add their name, and add their answer to what they think the meaning of life is. So we need to do that. And we also need to do that when they have added a comment, it's going to go to a page which says, well done, or success, you have successfully added your answer to this really difficult question. So that's what we're going to work on. And I'm already in my development server. So you can see that's where I am. I've activated virtual environment. I'm now in there, and I ran python bigquestions.py. So let's just stop that, Control C for a minute. Slows down the machine a little bit. Sort of frozen for some reason. And let's get into our actual files. So Sublime Text. I'm losing track of which files are which, so I'm just going to close all of these for now. Make sure I have the right folder. And look, I can actually, this is not going to delete this folder, it's just going to remove it from my Sublime Text. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to open the folder, the original folder that I was working on, which is in the HP memory stick. And good question now, I think, yeah, it was there, wasn't it? My folder. So I just click on that and select folder, and it opens up all the files that we were working on. So let's begin with templates. So remember, in your templates folder is where you have the HTML pages. These are typically like the views, the thing that you see on the screen. We have an about, a home, layout. That's just a backup. Let's make another one, and let's call it add comments. So there you go, save as, and add comments, add comment, maybe add comments, and make sure it's an HTML file. It's very important that you make sure that that is an HTML file. Otherwise, when you do HTML and tab, it wouldn't generate the automatic HTML. But for now, on the HTML file, let's think about what we actually want to put on add comments. Now, go back to the, this is still running, that's good. Go back to the home page. Remember what I said? I said that when we click on add a comment, I'd like a form, a Bootstrap form, to be generated down here. So essentially what I'm saying is I'd like this bit to stay exactly the same, but I'd like the bottom bit to change and for it to actually generate a form, or not generate a form, display a form that the user can fill in. So if I go back to Sublime Text, what I could just do is copy everything that is on the home page. You can ignore the comment and stick it onto add comments. Save that. Now of course I don't want this, so I could get rid of it. And I can leave the button. You can choose how you want to design this page. I'm going to leave the button there. And I was thinking that I don't like the color of the button. I don't like it to be blue. I want, in my mind, it was green. So let's have a look at how we can change that, and we can also add a Bootstrap form. So in order to do that, we go to bootstrap.org again. I think it's getsbootstrap.com, and click on documentation. On the left, you can search for different components. So let's first start, let's look at buttons here. And you'll see the different types of buttons. Now, typically, primary is blue. You get to learn these things if you've been working with Bootstrap, and success is green, danger is red. So usually, if you change that word to the respective word, it will change color appropriately. So let's have a try of that. So on the home page, let's change that to, is it success? Double C, double S. And I'm going to do the same thing on the add comments. Save. Something really simple that shows you how you can look up a component and you can think about how you might change it as you wish. So you can see the button is blue, blue's a nice color, but green is even better. So there you go, add a comment. And actually I don't want this stuff, do I? Because that's going to be generated beautifully from the database. So I can go back to home, and I can get rid of this. Instead of getting rid of it, I think I'm going to store it down here in what's called an HTML comment. So it's sort of hidden, it's not going to do anything, but it will be there if I want to refer to it, which I might need to later. So there, I've got this. Now, in the add comments, we don't have a view for it, so we can't see it yet, but we want underneath it, underneath where it says add a comment, we want there to be a form. So on Bootstrap, let's have a look for forms. And actually, there's loads of different types of forms that you can choose, and you can customize these. Use some beautiful CSS to make the form look really pretty, or the input box to look interesting, the buttons to do different things. Let's keep it really simple for now. Classic little form. Let's just use this one. So email address and password. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to stick it in add comments right underneath the button. It's in between the center tags, so that's good there. I'll just leave that. Right, now, as mentioned, we can't really view this, so maybe we should produce a route or a route for it so we can view it, but for now, let's just quickly make a few changes. It's not going to be difficult. So we know that the first thing that the user puts in is the title, so let's change that. The second thing is its name, wasn't it? And we also need a space for comment. Now let's divide this up so you can really see what's happening. This is the beginning of the form, and that's the end of the form, because you can see the tags. And these are the different components in the form. You have these divs which start every little part, and a close div, \div. You can, each sort of input type, it specifies the input type. So this is an email, for instance, this is a password. We turn into little asterisks, or this would automatically validate to make sure an @ was entered. And you also have a label and ID, which is going to be very important. We'll come back to that. But for now, let's just get we don't need that, do we? We can get rid of that. And we also need another sort of field, so I'm just going to copy and paste that for comments. Oops. Right, now the input type, we do need to change this, and I'll demonstrate to you why. But first let's just save it, let's see what it looks like, see if it doesn't look too bad. Now of course, in order to see it, we can just view it as an HTML file, but let's produce a route for it. So I go to big questions.py, and just down here, now mind you, I'm making this route now for add comments, but it is going to change significantly because this is going to be a very special route which deals with post and get requests, because we're actually getting something from the user and we're putting it into a database. So this is going to change a lot, but for now, let's just create it so we can do something and see something. So add comments. Comments, that's right. Great, and where does that add comments come from? We know that when we click on this home button, it takes us to add comments. So if you remember how we link things up, let's go back to the layout page and let's copy and paste one of these URL4s. So URL for home would take us back to the home page, and similarly shouldn't be too hard to figure out that if you paste that in there, but you change that to, remember, to the function, not to the page, to the function, which I can't remember what it's called now, so it's called add comments. There, that should start to work. So if we refresh the page, first of all, it's gotten rid of that, and it's nice and blue, and I click on add a comment. Brilliant, it's worked. It takes me to add comments, which is the HTML page, and it also generates this lovely form. Now watch what happens. If I put in some data here, and I put in some data here, which is name, you can see what's happening. It's turning this into a password, and it's turning this into something else, and if I click submit, it says please include an @ It's all over the place, because the input types of each of these text boxes haven't been specified. So let's go back to add comments, and let us specify the input types. Now the input type, let's just keep it simple for now. Let's just make them all text. Oops, there. Input type, text, text. And one really important step that you mustn't forget is this ID. Now the ID is the unique reference point for how you're going to be referring to this field. It's really important that it matches up with what it is, what the field is. So that's a name, let's just call it something sensible, and we have that as the comments. And in fact, there's another little thing that you need to add here, which is name as well. You can just, let's do this quickly, it will save us some time later. So name and name. And over here, when actually the ID name is equal to title. So we've got that set up, that works. It doesn't look great on the screen. We can do different things, like we can add a little kind of div class, or we could center it. This whole thing's centered at the moment. Let's just experiment a little bit. If I centered that form, American spelling, and right at the bottom of the form, if I said /center, and I saved it, let's have a look at what it does. Well, it kind of does something. And you can play around with this, you can play around with the width and the height, and I'll try and do an additional Bootstrap tutorial, but you can look these things up, look at various tutorials. Very simple, and you can customize your site as you see fit. So we've got this set up. Now let's think, are we ready? We don't want that check me out, do we? So let's get rid of that. I think this whole thing can be gotten rid of, actually. Yep, great. So we get rid of that. Refresh it again, and I think we're ready to actually start working with a database. So let's have a look. We have an about page, we have a home page. We add a comment. Now, there's one thing missing here, because when you add a comment, someone's going to put in a deep and meaningful comment into these fields, and what should happen when you click submit is it should go back to the home page where we have a table where it's going to display all those comments. So let's quickly have a look at that as well. So again, Bootstrap has tables, loads of different tables. I'm going to pick the first one for convenience, but do feel free to look through and pick something that really fits your fancy, takes your fancy. So I've copied this table, which is going to generate that. We have to change the fields, and you'll see how that works in a minute. So that's going to be on the home page. Should I center it? And I think I will keep it in there. So I paste in this. Now, this is a bit tricky. I'll show you what it looks like. What I think it might look like. It looks like that now. All we really need is we need this to be changed to title, name, and comments, and we need one just placeholder field. And we're going to, soon we're going to get to it, we're going to make the database, and when the user actually puts something into the database, it's going to be beautifully generated on the screen. So we can change these, and we also need to get rid of these, the second and third record. So if I go back to my code here in home HTML, let us change that. That's going to be an ID number. That's going to be, what was it? First thing was title, like a slug kind of thing. Name, and that's going to be comments. And divide this all up, you can see what's happening. That's table row. TR stands for table row. And you can see that's 1, 2, and actually I can get rid of all of these. That's the body, so we want to keep that, but I can get rid of these 2 rows. So if I backspace that, move that up, oops, move that up again, and I press save, and I go back, I've got this, and now I really am ready to go. I can see there's a niggly thing. There should be really a space between this add a comment and this table. So if I went back, one last time, let's see where our button is. There it is. That's not nicely formatted, is it? Let's see something at the end of that. Anyway, you can see this little BR here. What that does is it's a break. It gives you a line break. So if I put in maybe 2 more, and we can see if that works, delete 1 if it's too many down. Brilliant. So add a comment, user adds a comment, they click submit, and that comment is going to be added back into the table on the home page. This is getting really exciting now, and we're going to get into the database aspect. Now I realize you might have had enough of this bootstrap and the front end stuff and you're dying to get into the database aspect of things, but I did forget one thing, and that is the add success. Now remember, when a user adds a comment and they successfully add a comment, you've probably been on sites, in fact we added one on hundreds on Test and Track, where it says something like successfully added or successfully deleted, or whatever. You need to inform the user of what's happening, and that's good practice. So we need to make an actual an additional page which is doing that. We can call it add success.html. So let's go back here into our templates folder, new file, file, save as, and let's call it add success.html. Oops. Think about how you want this to look. Really, I want it basically to be the add comments page, but for it to get rid of the form, possibly you could leave the form, it's up to you, and then for it to have a little notification which says add success. So I'm just going to, for simplicity, that's Control A, which copies everything on the screen in the page, and then Control C, and I'm going to copy it into this add success page. Down at the bottom where I can see the form there, I'm just going to delete, I'm going to get rid of the whole form, and underneath where it says add, I could actually delete the button as well. I think I'll leave the button, and right underneath the button I'm going to add an alert or notification. So back to good Bootstrap, good old Bootstrap, and let me type in, say like notification alert. Gives me different alerts. Let's do that one, right? And it's good to keep with convention. A red alert tends to signify something's wrong. A green one tends to, users tend to be used to these sort of practices. That signifies success. So if I look at the success alert and I just copy the whole thing, which is from the div to the div, nothing difficult here. I'm just going to literally paste it in. So div to the div, add success, am I in the right place? I think I am. And I save it, and of course I would like it to say something other than what it says. Let's say something polite. Thank you for your amazing contribution and comment or answer. Okay, so when a user has submitted a comment successfully, they will come up to this HTML page. So to just show you the sheer amount of actual work that goes into doing every view that you see. So that has been completed. We're now ready to start looking at how we can connect to a database, and just think a little bit about what is a database, how it works, how we're going to work with it, some different ways in options that we could have if you wanted to go down that route as well. So at last we are ready to get into our database connectivity. The database is going to be the real driving force of the application. You can have static websites which don't really do anything, but when you have a database you're actually dealing with data which can go back and forth. So we're going to do steps 3, 4, 5 and 6 now. So that's going to involve making 3 different .py files, which are going to do with actually making the database, creating a table, filling it with data, etc. Before we do that, let's just consider, this is something, if you have been studying computer science, you should really know what a database is. It's just an organized collection of data. And obviously when data is organized, it really becomes information. It allows, a relational database would allow you to access that data electronically, and you have different types of databases, different systems. Now with the system that we're going to be using is SQLite, and SQL is something, depending on what course you're doing, you really need to know. So we're going to be doing this, setting up this whole database structure in pure SQL, which is amazing because you get to really see how it works and write SQL queries. There are different options. Now, when you're looking at a large, creating something like Facebook, and by the way, Facebook has servers which look like that. I mean, that they take up an entire geographical location, and that's where they store the data. So when you're dealing with a large application, maybe one of you will be thinking about making something which will extend to the reach that Facebook has. You do need to consider how to make your app scalable, maintainable. You need to think about things like standardization, the dry principle, don't repeat yourself, because if you have loads of pages and you're repeating yourself, it's just not good for maintenance, ease of development, abstraction, so many things. Speed, of course, is a big issue. So these are things to consider. However, there's a big debate, not a big debate exactly, but there is a debate amongst developers about whether you should use pure SQL or what's called an ORM. Okay, so there's a thing called SQL Alchemy, which comes very highly recommended for dealing, particularly with Flask, for dealing with databases. And it's basically a way, how shall I put this? It's a way of not writing SQL. So you're not actually writing SQL. You're writing Python, you're creating classes and models, and when you execute it, it sort of does it for you. This toolkit produces SQL queries for you. So this is an option, and it might be worth at some point looking at things like SQL Alchemy, and it just provides a nice Pythonic, if you prefer to write Python than SQL, a Pythonic way of interacting with databases. It's very simple, but we're going to be doing it the pure SQL way, and we're going to be creating a database from scratch, and it's great, a great learning experience for you. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to close down all this stuff. And here we have our database. And remember, what we're trying to do is create a database which stores data. And the data that we have, if you think about the inputs, it's a very tiny database. It's just storing title, name, and comments. So what we're going to do is go back to Sublime Text, and I suppose I can keep these open for now, but go back into our parent folder, to the main folder there, and I'm going to right click, new file, and I'm going to create a file. Make sure this is not an HTML file. So very carefully you go File, Save As, remember it's there in my Flask folder, and I'm going to call it, what did I say, create, let's call it db create, okay, and make sure you say .py. Now, this file, I can add a comment in Python because it is still a Python file. It's just literally, it's going to do what it says. It's going to use SQLite, and it's going to happen to be SQLite 3 to create the database for us, which we don't have at the moment. So if you look over here on the left, we don't have a database. We're going to create one. So you're going to follow along, just type it with me, follow along with these steps. The first thing you do is import SQLite 3. You then define a variable. You can call it anything you like. I'm just going to go db locale, like local, and we're going to tell it the name of our database, which I'm going to call users.db. Now, what's nice is Flask is kind enough to actually generate this database for us if it doesn't exist. So if users.db doesn't exist, which it doesn't, on running this Python file, it will actually create that database for us. So it's pretty simple, and that's actually done. But now, in the next bit, we're going to create a connection. So obviously we're going to have a database, but how do you connect to it? We're going to create a connection. Let's call it Connie. I've seen that done in various tutorials. So Connie is the variable name, and what Connie does is it's going to connect to this database. Remember, that's just basically saying connect to users.db. Now this is setting up a sort of like cursor. Just think of C as a variable which is you're going to use to create lots of different commands like execute, fetch all, etc. So you'll see. So we just set it up here. This is just the setup part, cursor, and remember we're going to use this to create commands, and this will make sense in a minute. So let's create our first command, which is going to be to actually create this database. And I'm going to write cexecute, and we're going to make in here an SQL query. So I'm going to use triple quotation marks, end with triple quotation marks, and in between here, let's leave some space there, we're going to actually have to write some SQL. Now, SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is absolutely crucial. It's on most sort of high school syllabuses. In the A-level, you'll be studying it, and you need to know how it works. You need to be able to write SQL statements. So where do you start? You don't just do this from your head. You actually you look it up, and obviously the more you do it, you get used to it. It's very simple. So one of the best resources for SQL is here. W3 Schools, back to W3 Schools again. And if you click on it, scroll somewhere down here, I think, you have an SQL reference. So you don't have to remember any of this. If you're looking to do something, you just simply look it up. So I want to create a table. First of all, create a database in the first place. So it gives me the code here for, let's have a look at different things here. So create a table. And this is going to allow me to actually make the different fields, set them up, and generate them when I run my .py file. So you can just copy and paste that, or you can get used to writing it. There's different ways in which you can do it too. You can look up anything on Google. It will give you some good advice. So in here, I'm going to write my SQL. And I want to create a table. You can call this anything. You can call it answers, you can call it comments, as long as you remember what the table name is, because you're going to be referring to it a lot. And in this table, of course, you need to specify the different types of fields that you're going to have. So it's a good idea to always have a ID, which is, if you've learned about relational databases, let's make that the primary key. Primary key just means it's a field which is unique. You can't have two IDs. It's going to be there, and actually let's just make it auto. So auto increment, comma. If I spot that right, increment, comma. Right, and then we're going to have name, of course. That's going to be the text data type. I'm not going to be specific with the amount. I'm just going to keep it quite brief for now, but you can go back and you can always customize. And we can have date posted. I should just keep it simple for now. So just name, title, and comment. So this is like the simplest database that you could ever set up. Name, title, and comment. And I've got it there. Now, once you've created this database, oops, make sure that's part of that aspect there, because that ends the cexecute statement. Whenever you've made a change or you've done something to database, in programming terms, you have to do something which is called commit the changes. I don't know why it's called that. It's used in GitHub as well. So what we need to do is actually type in connie.commit. Don't forget these two brackets. If you forget them, nothing works because the command is not recognized. So connie.commit, and then we have to close the database because we don't want it open forever, causing trouble. So that is it. I'm going to save this. And believe it or not, as simple as that, I have actually created a database. So it's not responding there. But once it has saved, I'm going to run. Now, there's different ways in which you can run. I'm going to actually just show you running it as a Python file, sort of using idle, what you would have done in school or when you were experimenting with Python. And let's see what happens. So note that there's nothing much happening on the left in there in that folder. And I'm going to go into the actual folder, which is, remember, on my F drive. Here it is. And I've got db create. So I'm going to open it. Here it is. You can check all the indentation. So remember, in Python, indentation is very, very important. Do watch some of the introduction to Python videos if you're confused about that. But sometimes you might get an error like, oh, that's the indent is not in the right place, and that will not run your program. So once you're sure it looks okay, you click on Run and Run Module, and it says syntax error. So it says line 17. I'll just quickly go back over here. Line 17, syntax error. Something's wrong. I think I have an extra comma there. I think that's the problem, but we'll find out. Is there anything else? Sometimes when it says line 17, it actually means on the line before that. So text, it could be referring to these two things. So I'm going to close this down now again. It's good to have errors and to see someone troubleshooting so you don't get scared every time you see an error. So run it again. And again it says cannot operate on a closed database. Connie.commit cannot operate on a closed database on line 20. Now this is good. This is a good one. I've done it in the opposite way. I should have said Connie.commit because I'm committing the database command that I've just created there to create a table, and then I want to close the database. I don't want to do it the opposite way around. So I save that, and again, let's come back. Let's close these Python files. I'm going to open it one last time. Might not be the last time, so let's have a look. Oops. We're going to open it with idle and run it. And this time it says something quite interesting. It says table comments already exists. And that's good. It probably means I'd run it before, or the first time I ran it actually did create a database and it created a table. So it means it's done something and it's been successful. So maybe just close this and come back into the folder. And actually you can see there that it's produced something that wasn't there before. So the name of the database was users.db, and indeed there you have a users file. It's a database file. We've created our database. So that's great. Now if you try and look into this, it's just going to look really weird. So don't worry about that, but you can see that the fields are there and it's been set up correctly. So great, we're now going to move on to the next thing. So in this next bit, we're going to look at actually populating. That's a nice programming word that programmers use for actually filling in, or I can't think of another word than populating, adding data into the database, into the table, to fill it with information. So how do we do that? We're going to make another file in the parent folder. It's a new file, and I'm going to call it db. You can call it anything. I'm going to call it something logical that I can refer to, come back to. db populate. Don't forget the .py. Now, most of this is just going to be exactly the same, so I could just copy it actually. So let's just copy it. But this time, what we're doing on this in this file is populating the database with some records. So now it's filling it in. So on the top, we would type in the same thing. We import onto that file, db locale. We make sure that's set up correctly. This is the connection which is set up. And then, of course, we're going to have some sort of beautiful SQL command here, which is going to add, insert into the table. And then, of course, at the end, we always have Connie commit, Connie close. So you're going to get used to this really quickly. It's pretty simple. You import, you have a connection, you have a command, which is an SQL command, where you're writing pure SQL, and Connie commit, Connie close. So we need to insert some data into this database. So remember we had the dummy data, which is being displayed. Forget that. We're going to actually put a couple of records just to start the database off. So how do we do that? And remember, you don't do this from your head. You have a wonderful reference point, which is SQL on W3 Schools, or indeed anything. Just Google it. But this should do the trick. So I want to insert into. So let's just keep looking down here, and you see there it says insert into. It's quite intuitive. Usually the thing that you're looking for, you'll see, you'll recognize, and there we are. Insert into sort of gives us the syntax for the SQL command, which you can just copy. There's slightly different ways of doing it where you can specify this or that, but effectively that is what it is. So let's go back to our little command here, and I'm going to type out our command just so you can see and think about what's happening. So insert into, what are we inserting into? We're trying to insert the data that we're about to create into our table, not into our database, directly into our table, and our table's name was comments. So get that right. So don't type in comment or comments. That can cause endless kind of error checking and not figuring out what was wrong. So insert into comments, and then you have brackets like that, and then you put in the names of the fields that you wish to populate. So in this case we have, was it title first? Yeah, title, name, comment, date posted. We didn't do that, so forget that. So then you write values, and this is where we're going to have a tuple. If you've learned about that in Python, you have different data types like string, integer, list, but you also have tuples and dictionaries. So this is a tuple, which is held in brackets like that, and we're going to have a tuple. Each tuple is going to contain a record. So the first one, let's say Mrs. Marvin, right, which is me. She wishes to say something profound about the meaning of life. Now, see, this is where it gets really hard. It's making a database in Flask is easy, but what is the meaning of life? Now, you know, my 4-year-old said that it's to do with life, and I thought that was interesting. Most people that I speak to would agree or would say that the meaning of life has to do with relationships, but it's quite interesting. They also point out that if a relationship is not eternal, in other words, if it ends or if it comes to an end, it's temporary, you just feel that loss of purpose, lacking in meaning. Why would you invest everything into a relationship that would end, into a person that would come to an end? And that's an interesting question. It's something to consider. And if I was to write a comment, I would say something like, well, perhaps meaning but how do we attach ourselves to something eternal? Who is eternal? You know, and we're going to look at a bit of cross-curricular here. We'll look at different religions and what they say, different philosophical perspectives. It's very interesting. But what makes anything meaningful? It doesn't have to be eternal. It doesn't have to be other things like good and true. If it's none of those things, it's lacking in meaning. And we find meaning for ourselves. There's many different things we could say. So at the end of the tuple, note that I've just filled in the tuple with inverted commas, separated with commas. There, that's the name. And actually I think it starts with title, so let's get that right there. So life and relationships is like the slug line sort of thing. Relationships. This is the name, and then the next bit is the comment. So don't forget a comma after that, and then the next one, let's keep that simple. Should we have the title is just going to be like 42. Oops. And this is going to be said by someone very, very boring. Joe Blogs, who doesn't want to think and just wants to refer to a movie. And he's going to say, yeah, someone had to say it, 42. Okay, so we've got two records. You can add as many as you like. You don't add a comma at the end, and remember then I've got an extra bracket there. It ends there. So I could save this, and when I run this, it should, don't keep running it multiple times, because obviously what that's going to do is populate the database several times. When I run it, it should in effect populate the database with these records. So quickly, and this is a good way of checking for errors as well. So HP, Python folder, Flask folder, populate, idle. Great. So nothing happens, no errors. That means the database has been populated. Just take my word for it, and we can verify that in the next step. Now, how do we verify that? How do we know that the database has anything in it? Well, we've got to do what's called query the database. Q-U-E-R-Y, query, like asking a question and it returns the data that is dumped inside of it. So we're going to make one last file. So we've done db create, we've done db populate, and we're going to make another one which you should be able to guess the name of. Let's call it db query. Remember, you can call it anything. These are just arbitrary, just any names that make sense to you. Don't forget the .py. So in the db query .py, and I switch off my phone so it stops beeping, we're gonna populate it with a query and exactly the same code as this as well. Let me just type it in actually. So just remember, import SQL Lite 3. You set up your database, which is users.db. I shouldn't be typing this again because I could be making a mistake, but let's just do it for the sake of .connect.db locale. C, set up your command thing, which is going to be for creating the commands, and there triple quotations is where we put in our command. Now remember, this time, what are we trying to do? We're trying to do the reverse. We're not trying to put something into the database, we're trying to get something out of it. And a standard SQL command for that is just select star, which stands for all. So you could say something like select from comments, where this is saying basically select from the table, and then you could specify which field, but we just want everything. So I just want to say select star, which means all, from, and you've got to get the syntax right there, from comments, which is the name of the table, and that's it. That's basically going to give us everything that is stored in the table comments. So down here, we're going to do something slightly different. Let's just add our little connie.commit, spell it right because it won't work otherwise, and connie.close. But up here, we're also going to create, just for ease of use, we're going to make a little variable. We can call it anything, users, let's just call it user info for now. And I'm going to use, again, our little C here, which allows us to execute commands or do clever stuff with it. And I'm going to use a command called fetch all, which fetches everything from the database, and it's going to put all of it into this variable called user underscore info. You can use different commands here. There's things like you can specify which one, fetch one, but we'll just use fetch all for now. And then if I print user info, you should be able to see what is stored in the database. Okay. Now, if I just print user info, it's just going to print it in a massive sort of like tuple, which won't look very user friendly. Let's have a look so you can see what that looks like. So query, and we run, and I've made a mistake there. I've actually typed in SQL Lite 2 instead of SQL Lite 3, so let me change that, save that, close down your Python files, and remember we're opening up the query. Oops, I opened it up with the wrong idle, but it should still work. And let's see what happens. Brilliant. So what it does is it prints out a sort of kind of mass, a jumble of everything that is in the database. Now this is where, if you have done some basic Python, you can start to use your Python knowledge to make things a bit more beautiful. Really going to be using Ginger to produce the same effect in the HTML. But for now, let's just do a quick have a look at that. So you could type in for user in user info and print user. So this is referring to every user which is in user info, which is, remember, basically storing all the information in the database. I save that and It's not really good practice that I have it open there, so it might cause an error, but yeah. And it just sort of prints it out again. And I think you can see that it's repeating itself, which is probably because I populated the database twice. So anyway, this is all set up, and this is great, because basically what we've done is we've set up the back end. We've got the create query, which creates a database. You don't have to do that again, you just leave it there and have it. A populate, which just populated it with some initial data. It inserted something into it, and we'll come back to this. And also a query, which you're going to be using the results of, obviously, to place on the home page. So the back end is set up. We now need to get back into our HTML, and we need to think about, how do we put the whole thing together? How do we make it that a user comes along and he adds something, or she adds something into this form, clicks submit, and that is stored into the database? And equally, when something is in the database, how do we go back to the home page and get all of that displayed here? Now, at this point, you might be feeling a bit more confident. Hopefully you are, especially if you've been following along with me, and you might be able to just about do this yourself. But if not, keep watching. Obviously, we're going to put the whole thing together, and do keep referring to the Flask documentation and looking things up online if you get stuck. So if you are the sort of person who everything has gone wrong for, nothing has worked, or even if you just like to reflect on something at the end of the lesson, these are the things that we've done. You can pause the screen, you can check your work, but basically we finished off the views. We made a add comments.html, we did an add success.html, we created 3 Python files which to do with the back end, creating the database, the table, and making a query for the database. And here is the structure if you want to look at what we have so far. We also have all of this code, which eventually I'll put up on GitHub as well. This is the add comments page, the add success page. We had the db create.py, which creates a database, and on the same page actually makes the table as well. We also have the populate, db.populate.py, which populates the database with data, and query, which actually draws, which uses a select star, which select all statement, which draws everything from the database, puts it into a variable, which can then be printed. And obviously you realize probably that we're going to be using that to display this information on the HTML website.